Hello, everybody. It's time for the XP Billionaires podcast. How's everyone doing today? I'm going to assume you're all saying great, so I'll tell you that I'm doing just as well. I'm Ray Fegram, as you all already know, and I've got Sky Knight and Irene Rogue with me as well. Sky, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm good. Just waiting for your ridiculousness. It'll happen.
Not this time. I'm going to be super chill today. And that sound can only mean that Irene is here. So how are you doing today as well?
Incredulous that you think that you're not going to be ridiculous.
No, I'm gonna be super calm. I'm gonna be super simple. No fuss, no trouble. We got a lot to go over today, so let's get started. So today our topic is going to be the use of mythology in RPG gaming. So games have been using different mythologies to develop their narratives and expand their worlds for as long as RPGs have existed, really. Whether the myths are based on an existing mythology or myths are invented as part of the world created, it's an excellent way to flesh out a setting. So this week, I wanted us to kind of have a roundtable and discuss some of the games that have done this incredibly well and and our thoughts on them. What we're going to do first is we're going to talk about which game best presents a real life mythology in our own opinions. So, Sky, you're up first. So, what do you think?
Well, I'm gonna go with one very near and dear to my heart, Persona 3. Well, I could talk generally about SMT and Persona being infused with demons based on figures of myth and legend, and literature for that matter. I want to narrow in specifically on Persona 3 due to its heavy emphasis on Greco-Roman myth. Now, you see, early in the game, when the protagonist's initial persona, Orpheus, is revealed, he briefly transforms into Thanatos, the Greek god of peaceful death. This ties into the greater plot in a big way. To avoid spoilers, I will refrain from explaining exactly how, but those who have played the game to its finish will know exactly what I mean. Also, well, I think most Persona fans assume the blue butterfly imagery is a callback to Philemon from the original Persona games. The blue butterfly is also a symbol tied to, guess who? Thanatos. Also, the final antagonist is Thanatos' mother, called to a place named for an area in the Greek underworld, Tartarus.
Which I believe she was also somewhat related to in the myth.
Yes, correct. It's deeply tied into the game's plot. That early sequence is really important, and you don't really understand it until you finish the game. Because they started him with Orpheus, it's pretty clear that this is meant to represent the fool of the tarot, basically. And he was a fool persona as well.
Yeah, and Orpheus, that whole story was about the man who had teetered on the edge of hell and went into the underworld to rescue his lost love, right?
Yeah.
A foolish ass thing to do.
Oh, yes. And then didn't even manage to successfully do it. But that moment where Orpheus sort of transforms into Thanatos, I don't know if you could scream foreshadowing any louder. Like, holy crap, is that the most blatant foreshadowing I have ever seen in my goddamn life?
There's also the fact that we didn't know what that persona was until much later on in the game, if I'm not mistaken. They didn't name it at the time.
No, and actually it doesn't necessarily look identical to the actual Persona Thanatos that comes out later. There are a few distinct changes that were made to the wild Persona version that came out of Orpheus. It's not super obvious, but it's subtle.
Yeah. So yeah, I really liked how they worked with the Greek myth to the ways in which it influenced the story, and I thought it was really well done.
Also, just as an additional thing, two of the villains, the antagonists, their personas are Hypnos and Moros. They're related to Thanatos as well.
Yeah, Hypnos in the myth is his twin brother.
Mm-hmm. I believe they're all brothers.
I do not remember specifically. I know Hypnos being the god of sleep, and Thanatos being the related god of peaceful death, or non-violent death, if you want another way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Most of that family of deities were like all about death. I mean, so was Nyx.
Ultimately.
Yes. Yeah, Greek myth is it's a complicated thing. But I really liked the way they used it here to inform the story and to hint at certain aspects of it, yet not completely give it away. Like, it didn't follow any sort of mythological script. It just used the myth to inform aspects of the story. So, yeah, it's the one that best represents a real life mythology to me.
Awesome. It's definitely doesn't. And Persona's done that really well. They've done that. They did that with Persona 4 as well, using Japanese mythology. We won't get into it too much, but it's something that Persona and even Shin Megami Tensei just does really well.
Yeah.
Anybody who's played a single game in the series can understand. So, Irene, you're up. What non-surprising game are you going to discuss that involves a real-world mythology?
The one I'm picking, we're just going to absolutely murder all of the Greek myths and move over to the Norse myths. And if that doesn't put you back where I put you in line with where I am at, I'm talking about God of War. There's no way we're going to talk about mythology, and I'm not going to talk about the new God of War. And what I really liked about what they did with the new God of War game, with Kratos, they transplanted him into the world of Norse mythology. And this created a sort of perfect stranger to allow the player to really get into the meat of the lore. And there's lots. Eventually, you meet a character named Mimir, also a Norse mythological figure, the smartest man in the world, and therefore keeper of all sorts of myths, legends, and knowledge. And everywhere you go, Mimir is explaining to you the often bloody history of Odin, his kin, the Aesir, the Vanir, and the parallels with Kratos' own history of violence. So, if for those of you who aren't aware, Kratos basically murdered the entire Greek pantheon. There are no more Greek gods because Kratos killed all of them. And at this point, he's very much trying to not become a god killer for an all new pantheon.
That's a good thing?
Yeah, well, the Norse gods are assholes, and that's actually quite portrayed very well through the game, is that Mimir, you'll wander into places like, oh wow, there's a dragon here. It's like, oh yeah, well, this Norse god actually transformed this dwarf into a dragon, Fafnir, because he was greedy. The way that they've presented the mythology is it focuses mainly on Odin and his immediate family. Because, spoiler, if you don't want to know the identity of the man who comes and kicks the shit out of Kratos at the beginning of the game, skip ahead a few minutes so you don't have to listen to me talk about God of War. It's Balder. Balder is the one that shows up at your door. And for those of you who know anything about Norse mythology, Balder is the god that cannot die. But also he can't feel anything. Because his mother Freya made a pact with everything in the world to not hurt him, except mistletoe, which becomes relevant at some point throughout the game. And this is actually super important because the story revolves around the parent and child relationship. It focuses in on Kratos and Atreus' relationship in particular. And the way that the main antagonist Balder and his relationship with his mother is portrayed, it's like a foil for Kratos and Atreus. Because here you have Kratos who is distant and doing his best to not ruin his son. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have Freya, who ruined Balder by trying to protect him from everything. She's the ultimate helicopter parent because she literally made it so that he couldn't feel like touch, pain, anything. He is locked in his body, unable to feel any kind of sensation, and it's driven him to madness. So it's a really great way to, like, they've managed to find this particular part of Norse myth and sort of use it to contrast the changing relationship between Kratos and Atreus throughout the entire game. And of course, like, just from a setting perspective, what they do is they take the Norse sort of view of the world and take it as rote. This is how the world is actually constructed. The various realms like Alfenheim, Jotunheim, Helheim, they're all linked by the world tree, Yggdrasil at the center, and that's actually how the character moves around through the different realms. And also the fast travel is facilitated as by the roots of Yggdrasil as well. And while you're fast traveling, Mimir will also tell you more stories, which is kind of nice. Because you get to learn so much about the various portions of Norse mythology. Like, he'll tell you stories about great battles and statues, and Atreus will ask him questions about Thor and Odin and why did he do this, why did he do that, and you'll get all these different stories to sort of inform what kind of person Odin is and what kind of people his children are, so that you're better equipped to deal with Balder when he shows up. And a lot of the stories that Ymir happens to tell is around Odin's many conflicts with the giants. He hates the giants to the point where you actually come upon an area that is just literally a giant's corpse frozen in the snow, and you have to climb all over it trying to get at this chisel that's like buried underneath the ice. So it makes for a very striking visual set piece for the game as well. And Mimir informs you that this particular giant was killed by Thor, and that's, you know, straight out of myth. It is the giant that was killed by Thor within the method that was prescribed. Eventually, massive spoiler that I'm not going to get into, but Kratos no longer is the perfect stranger to the Norse mythological world. He becomes linked to its fate very directly, whether or not he does anything. And in fact, they teased it incredibly blatantly at the end of the last game, where the next game is likely going to be set on the cusp of Ragnarok because of, well, not necessarily Kratos' intervention. I'm going to come out and say this: the machinations of his wife, the woman who you bury at the beginning of the game. She was playing an extremely long game, and it's very interesting the way that they've integrated the myth of the end times with a character that is perfect for bringing it about. Because, like, it's not like the Greeks needed a myth of the end times. Kratos just became the end times.
Fair enough.
No, excellent. That is a lot to go through, and yeah, I mean, jumping from one pantheon to another, I mean, I feel like that's just going to be Kratos' life from now on.
Yeah, it's like he's like in charge of god killing at this point. It's his profession, even though he really doesn't want it to be. But I really liked the way that they because they were able to, you know, jump him from one pantheon to another. It meant that they were able to do all of this exposition with Mimir, and it didn't feel inorganic. It
Yeah.
felt like something that was naturally come up as you journey across the world, because Atreus' curiosity would cause him to ask a question, and Kratos wouldn't know the story, so he wouldn't shut Mimir up immediately.
Awesome. Okay, that was good. So we'll move on to mine. You guys have picked pretty much one mythology each. I feel like I'm going to do the rest of them with my choice. My choice is coming from the Xenosaga series. This series is littered with biblical mythology, religious references that come from so many different cultures. I mean, the biblical and Judeo-Christian references alone are massive. For example, you have the existence of Yeshua in the series, who is one of the disciples of Christ, as a character within the game. So, according to the game, in the days of Christ, Jesus could not actually perform the miracles he was made famous for. Yeshua was the one performing them in his place, as he was gifted in ways his mentor was not. And by the end of the series, you also encounter more or less the resurrection of Mary Magdalene as well, who carries the power of Animus along with Yeshua. You've got Earth, which was now known as Lost Jerusalem, and even the calendar year is referenced as TC, which is standing for Transcend Christ. So this is just the beginning. Like this is just one example of what you expect. The next one I could reference here is the Zohar, which is the relic that is the central focus of the series. It's also a reference to a Hebrew text that's the foundation of Kabbalah, which is a doctrine of Jewish mystical thought. It's also shaped very similarly to a cross and is apparently also adorned with Hebrew characters as well. As for Cosmos herself, she's also littered with both religious and mythical references. For example, one of the systems Shion uses to connect to Cosmos is called Nataraja, which is an avatar or alternate name for the Hindu god Shiva. And also, her login password is Genesis 3:5, ye shall be as gods. I mean, I could go further. There's so many other references we can go on, but we really only have so much time per episode here. So,
I'm just going
like,
to say that the reference to Cosmos as the Hindu god Shiva, based on how I was able to break her at the end of the game, that is pretty fucking accurate. She
true.
was disgusting at the end of the first game.
Yeah, and the whole Nataraja thing is used mostly at the very beginning of the game. It was for the virtual. It was basically for the tutorial dungeon of the first game. I just started playing them again, so I saw this, and yeah, so this was just one small thing, but that's what this series was just a littering of different religious and mythological references that it was just beautiful to have seen put together, and it all felt so cohesive in the end.
Yeah, because it's similar to what they did in Persona 3. They were using the mythological references to hint at story points.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Rather than the mythological references becoming the story points, which were more of the God of War approach, where you
Yeah.
think that the story is completely separate from the Norse mythology, and then you get to the end, it's like, oh shit, it's not. It's actually directly tied in very neatly, and oh shit.
Exactly. On that note, let's change gears a little bit. So the next question, which game or series best represents setting invented mythology? Sky, which game best represents that invented style mythology?
Okay. Seriously, was I gonna turn down a chance to talk about Suikoden?
No.
Never.
Pshaw. Pshaw.
I think we specifically teased you the last time we wrote about this that you didn't talk about Suikoden, and we thought you were sick and kidnapped by aliens.
Yes. So Suikoden has a fairly rich mythology, which actually bleeds into reality frequently throughout the series. The creation myth is particularly interesting. Paraphrasing, it suggests that brothers called Sword and Shield were born from a tier of darkness. The fight the brothers get into ends in mutual destruction, and pieces of them fall to create the world as we know it. The gems that adorned Sword and Shield become the 27 true runes, which are a factual reality within this Suikoden world. Is the creation myth actually real, though? It's kind of unclear. The rune of the beginning points to the myth while calling it into question at the same time. At the beginning of Suikoden 2, the rune of the beginning has split into two runes, the bright shield and the black sword. Sound familiar? What we don't know is if they are simply mirroring the truth, or did they themselves influence the development of the myth as it's been passed down? It's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario. We don't know which came first. Interestingly, the 27 true runes, while they are real, they're shrouded in mystery and not really widely known about, so they're kind of treated as myth and legend. I mean, some of them, there's 27 of them on the whole planet, and many of them have disappeared for extended periods of time. Whether they were sealed, whether they were without a bearer for a period of time, whether they just sort of stayed in some other form of stasis. I mean, I don't think the fact that Barbarossa had a true rune was well known. So, yeah, like I said, they've become legends in and of themselves. And I mean, really, they're the closest thing to divinity that the series has. There is talk in Suikoden 3 of the Zexans having a goddess figure, but it only comes up very briefly, and it seems to more just be a regional thing. Other than that, any sort of divinity figures seem to be largely absent, which also points to, the 27 true runes being actual divinity as opposed to there being other mythological figures.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing. Like even the one religious order that's really in the game with Holy Harmonia is focused directly on the Circle Rune, which is one of the 27.
Yeah, exactly. And Harmonia is big time interested in collecting the true runes. That's one of the massive plot elements that was sort of left at the end of Suikoden 3, which is the last in the timeline order. They're like, Harmonia is collecting the true runes! And then they do 2 prequels and nothing more.
And that's a damn shame. I will say that right then and there.
Irene, you're up.
Yep.
All right. So I wanted to go a little bit more narrow with the way I wanted to represent and invent in mythology and go with like a single game example because I found that it really drove home some important things I think about myths in general. And I'll get to it in a minute. So I picked Tales of Symphonia, and from the opening sequence where Kratos, because I'm sorry, listeners, I'm really sorry I'm making you do this. Kratos is a totally different character, spelled the exact same way. Narrates the myth of the goddess Martel. We're steeped in the mythology of the world. And like with many great myths, there's some truth to it. The game carefully explains the myth behind the origin of the world of Silverant, that it wanes when the goddess Martel sleeps, and she's woken by the journey of the chosen to sacrifice themselves and become angels. And this causes a resurgence of mana within the world of Silverant, life to flourish and for the people to prosper. And this is the basic myth you're given at the beginning of the game. But as it progresses, the curtain slowly peels back to reveal that it's only a fraction of the truth. And that's why I think that Symphonia shows a very important side to the myths. It's that it's wielded to control the people who believe it. So to explain the full depth of the truth behind the story of Martel is a massive spoiler, but it's all true and it's all lies. Nothing is quite as it seems. The story is perpetuated by a secret and shadowy group of powerful people to enable them to pit large groups of vulnerable and poor people against each other for their own benefit, intentionally throttling a precious resource in order to make people desperate. Too desperate to actually fight against the real problem, like capitalism. So it was a lot of fun standing up and telling them that they did get to win anymore. But they did that by perpetuating this myth. And every time you would learn a little bit more about the truth behind the myth of the goddess Martel, you'd see a little bit more injustice that was trying to be redressed by this particular action. But at the same time, it's like, does the injustice justify what ultimately became a system of one group of people eating the other one for survival? Unintentionally. But it would always ensure that one group of people was desperate and struggling to survive, and the other one was thriving. And they could switch positions at any time. Symphonia was great for that, because you would learn more and more about, like, I'll give one thing away. The angels aren't actually angels. And that's kind of how it works with most of this thing. It's like, yeah, they're angels, but they're using the look of angels to trick people, in a sense. They're using the whole myth to like perpetuate this myth that they're otherworldly beings, when in fact they're nothing more than mortal beings who have used special types of crystals in order to slow their metabolism, make themselves almost ageless, and give themselves extra powers. But nobody knows about them. So they're able to keep this precious resource for themselves, make themselves appear supernatural and divine in order to perpetuate what they want.
Nice people.
Oh yeah, they are a very interesting group of people. They're not particularly nice at all. And when you learn about the main villain's motivations for wanting to revive the goddess Martel, it's while sad, it doesn't necessarily justify the countless lives he's sacrificed, because at one point when it comes down to it, like the Chosen's journey repeats itself over and over and over again. And this is because the sacrifice was never what was needed to revive Martel. So all of those Chosens that he sacrificed, garbage.
Great.
Yeah, like it's literally just like throw them in the pile. You go to a particular place and it feels more like a mass grave than it does a shrine after you learn a bit more.
Oh, seems very culty, doesn't it?
It does. And that's actually what I really liked about Symphonia, is that you had this myth that ostensibly on its surface was true, but it wasn't. Because there were details missing, crucial details, that basically meant that everything that was on the surface was no longer true, and it was only being used to basically perpetuate an endless cycle where a small group of rich fucks could enrich themselves forever.
Cults and capitalism.
Essentially, the world of Symphonia, Silverant, and Tetheala were basically stood up as a testament to there is no way to achieve peace, so we will create a system of endless war.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to say that, like, I really liked the fact that it managed to take this mythology and tell the story through it, but also have something meaningful to say about myths in general. The stories that we tell serve the powerful in a lot of cases.
No, definitely. All right. Well, that only leaves with mine, my invented mythology here. So let's get on it. So mine comes from the Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel story. So the games that have come out so far, plus the future games. The Trails series in and of itself is an expansive continent full of history, religion, and folklore. A lot of the myths and legends of the series are not fully prominent within the story. However, if you love the world, you may take the time to read some of the many books that you have available for purchase, or they're in the Thor's Academy library. One subseries of books is entitled Erebonian Folklore, which goes over several different topics related to Erebonian myth and legend. So this includes the use of animism, which was actually a deviation from the existing religion. It also includes fiends, fairies, as well as these myths regarding the Great Knight, the Dark Dragon, the Crimson Demon, and the Immortal King. So these stories have been passed down in Erebonian history, but no such evidence of these stories happening have ever really existed. But there are signs of different mythological themes within the world. There's one forest in Erebonia that has a direct link to animism, for example, but you don't see anybody practicing. There's nothing like that. It's like you said, it's almost like a ruined forest, if anything. So the way I see it, just existing in this world and having access to it is a great way for someone who really is really gotten involved in the series. It allows them to get more deeply involved into it, which I think is really cool. And it also shows that the developers are putting a lot of thought into their setting. It doesn't have to be prominent, but the existence of it really helps sell your world. And that's what really kind of hit home for me.
I mean, sure, it's an important thing. I mean, when people don't know things, they make up stories. And those stories pass into legend and myth. It's a realism thing ultimately, strangely enough.
Unless you have powerful people who make up the stories for them, for their own advantage, as we've seen before.
There's that too, but more often you see things like, folk tales among the average village, right?
Oh, yeah.
The small local stories, things related to local forests and ruins and, geographical features. If you create a world without it, sort of mythology to it, it almost doesn't feel real the same way as some of the others do.
That's true. Like a lot of older RPGs that didn't really put that kind of extra story into it. Yeah, they didn't feel the same. You weren't immersed in that world. You were just there performing a task. So it's definitely a big difference.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I think that covers a lot of different mythological options that gamers have available to them when they want a really rich, story-driven experience. Those were fantastic options, and I loved every one of them. So, if there's any mythological based games that you guys want to talk about with us, you guys can always do that with us on Twitter. You can find me at Billionaires XP. You can check out my Instagram page, that's Ray Thegram, or you can check out my weekly streams on Twitch, which are also at Ray Thegram. Those are Wednesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern. Sky, where can everyone find you?
I'm at Skyknight XP on Twitter and Twitch, skyknight.xp on Instagram, and I stream on Tuesday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern.
And Irene, where can everyone find you?
You can find me at irogue_xp on Twitter and Twitch, and I usually stream on Thursday, 7 p.m.
All right, we'll have our transcript for this episode up shortly after release within a day or two, and that's courtesy of our XP Hobo. So definitely check that out. And don't forget to check out the XP Hobo on Twitter as well. That's XP_Hobo, if I'm not mistaken. And lastly, don't forget to check out all our big updates and new content coming through our coffee page. That's coffee.com/xpbillionaires. Hopefully you guys got to see some of that and checked out Sky's recent stream of Greedfall, which was a lot of fun. So I hope you guys come and check out any future things that we do. Again, coffee.com/xpbillionaires. All right, well, that's going to be it for us this week. And by the will of the gods, you must keep gaming. All right, we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.